Good afternoon. We're going to do a little comparison between the flute and the shakuhachi. On the flute, you have a very Western instrument. Shakuhachi, you have a very so-called Eastern instrument. Right away you can see there's a lot of differences between the two. Metal, bamboo, many holes, only traditionally 5 holes, although my flutes have 6 holes. And of course, when you play the flute, it's a transverse instrument. The shakuhachi is a vertical flute. So, starting with the embouchure hole, this is a really interesting difference. The size of the embouchure hole. On the flute, you can see there's a metal plate, and the embouchure hole is very, very small compared to the shakuhachi. The shakuhachi's embouchure hole is a bamboo resting pad for the chin. And I would say, if you look closely, maybe 3 times larger for the shakuhachi's embouchure hole. And this is an important point we'll get to later about why the shakuhachi evolved the way it did, why it came out this way. Starting at the top, then you have, on the flute, you have, of course, you have the head joint and the body and the foot joint. On the shakuhachi, you have 2 parts, and this is shocking to some people. You can take it apart, 2 parts. This is because the shakuhachi has 7 nodes of bamboo from the base, and when they make the flute, they cut out one of the bamboo nodes to make it exactly the right length so that the tuning is correct. The flute, on the other hand, you have the 3 parts, the foot and the body and the head joint. And the head joint you can use to tune the flute. You know, you can pull it out to make it flat, push it in to make it sharp. When the flute is made, of course, is made of metal. It's made with heat and in a foundry, whereas the shakuhachi is made by hand with the raw material being the bamboo. So in order to get the inside of the bore very, very clean, the maker uses lacquer, and this makes so that he can create this conical bore. The bore of the shakuhachi is like the old Baroque flute. It's a conical bore, meaning that the tube gradually gets smaller at the bottom. And this is why they use the root section, the thicker node section at the bottom, in part, because they want to have a thicker, narrower bore at the base of the flute. The Western flute, developed by Theodor Boehm in the 19th century, greatly differed from the Baroque flute. It's a cylindrical bore. In other words, the pipe is a straight pipe. And this was in order to get a bigger sound and a more homogeneous tone throughout the different notes on the scales on the flute. Another obviously huge difference we talked about earlier is the number of holes. I think if you count on the flute, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah, I remembered that now. There's 17 holes on the flute. And in order for the 10 fingers of the player to cover that, there are these mechanisms which enable the finger to have multiple hole coverage. The shakuhachi, only 5 holes. The middle fingers on either side, on the right or left hand, are left without a hole, and the thumb hole in the back. So you have the ring finger, first finger, ring finger, first finger, thumb. So this is a really big aesthetic and technical difference. I mean, anybody can open a hole. It's easy to drill another hole, which I've done here, which I've had done by the maker. But to reduce the number of holes is truly an act of some kind of perverse genius, almost. So the result of that 5-finger hole now is 5 holes is that the basic scale of the shakuhachi is a pentatonic scale. So, like Amazing Grace, a 5-note scale piece is very easy to play. You can whip up and down. And that scale is the traditional minyo or folk scale. So, for example, the oiwake style of playing is just as fluid as can be. "17 holes, keys." So the basic scale of the flute is the 12 notes of this chromatic scale that you have on the piano. So all the half notes are equally presented so that the player can play all 12 keys with equal facility. The goal, of course, of the 19th century musician and the composer was to have the possibility of modulating to all different kinds of keys, Western music. The flute student, as he studies the music, is trained in all those scales and is encouraged to keep a homogeneous tone so that scales are practiced so that each note is consistent. That way the conductor, when he says ta, when the conductor indicates the beginning of a tone in the whole orchestral palette, the flute can fit right in. The shakuhachi, on the other hand, is going to play a much more horizontal music, a much more some melody-oriented music, a music that is filled with beautiful nuance and all kinds of ornamentation and different ways of a similar phrase on the flute, using the tongue to start the tone and the fingers. So the aesthetic is so different between the two instruments. The use of keys on the flute enables the player tremendous facility. On the shakuhachi, on the other hand, because there are no keys, because there are only 5 holes, you're using just the fingertips to touch the column of air. The fingertips are actually, instead of having a key between the player and the column of air, you have a fingertip between the player and the column of air. So that whereas the flute player on the shakuhachi each tone is enunciated not with the tongue, but with the finger, so that on a shakuhachi, a scale might sound like this. So that the pronunciation of the tone is conducted by the finger rather than using the tongue.